checkout tracking by the NPD Group brings you a receipt collecting system that gathers data anonymously through technology we created, providing your businesses with answers.
So I have with me here several representatives across a broad range of disciplines as far as game development and also Hollywood IP licensing. So I would like you each to introduce yourself, tell us what company you're from, and maybe name a game that you're currently working on that you can talk about. We'll start here.
Hi, I'm Chris Jacquemin. I work at William Morris Endeavor. I look after the digital media group at the company, and by extension of that, am overseeing anything we're doing on the gaming side, both console and mobile. Last deal that I've been involved with that I can talk about is the Kim Kardashian mobile game, which I imagine people have heard of. It's done rather well. Thank you, Glue. Yeah, that's the most recent one that I can actually speak to.
Jameel, Khalfan. I work at Pocket Gems, running all of our licensing for IP. Most recent game, not released yet, but we've announced partnerships with the movie Mean Girls, as well as Demi Lovato, the actress and musician.
Hello, I'm Donny Makower, president of Red Interactive Agency. We're a digital agency that's been around for 15 years, and we've been building games for most of that time. So 2 years ago, we spun out Red Games, which is a dedicated game studio. And a recent title that soon to be released is actually called Skywhale, which is associated with a new Nickelodeon show that will be coming out called Game Shakers. So pretty interesting, and I think coming out in the next month or so.
Calvin Lim from Universal Pictures. I oversee the global mobile business for Universal, both on film and the TV side. One of our most recent hits was the Jurassic World game through Ludia, our licensee and partner, which is doing quite well and hopefully expanding with a few new updates coming very soon.
Hi, I'm Dan Murray. I run the interactive division for Skybound Entertainment. Skybound was founded by Robert Kirkman, who's the creator of The Walking Dead, amongst many other IPs. We are a digital media company that places the creator at the center, and we build out, we expand the worlds or the franchise in multiple directions through every single platform. So we have a comic book publishing business as well as a merchandising business. We work directly with the manufacturers on the merchandise side, and we shipped over 150 SKUs of merch last year. We also do television shows, so we have 3 different TV shows that are currently on the slate, including The Walking Dead and Fear the Walking Dead, which is coming out next week. And then we have Outcast, which is Robert's next TV series, which is coming out early next year on Cinemax. And we have another TV show that's in the works, unannounced, but we're doing that independently, so we'll be producing the entire series and taking it to a digital network. On the interactive side, we're most well known for the partnership that we have with Telltale Games for the Walking Dead series, and we are just announced this summer that we're doing the next iteration of that game, which will be a spin-off of Michonne. So that's going into the 3rd season of the relationship with Telltale. Other games that we're working on, we have about 10 in the pipeline, actually. I joined a little over a year and a half ago to help expand the business on the game side, and we have The Escapist, The Walking Dead, which was just announced recently. So it's an expansion pack, a standalone expansion pack with an indie game called The Escapist with Team 17. We're also doing some special DLC arenas for a game called IDARB, which is sort of an 8-bit esports title that's been a big hit on Xbox One.
Developed in Oakland, California, by the way.
Yes, they are. So far, so good.
You've mentioned Walking Dead 6 times, and you currently won the award for longest intro. Just
thank you. Yeah. Well, I know. I'm trying to wrap it up real quickly. I got a couple more. We have Super Fight, which is a social card game. We announced that game. We're working on that with Pipework Software, and we are also working on several unannounced games coming out.
Awesome. Thank you. Interestingly, you mentioned several different IPs, whereas on this end of the table, we had several different celebrities or standalones. So my first question for you are, what are some of the challenges that come from working with a license that's a show versus a license that's, say, just a single human being or performer? Can we talk about that a little?
I can talk a little bit about it. I have experience on both. I think in terms of working with a show or even with a movie or a franchise like that, one of the advantages you have is that there is ideally this sort of rich universal world that you can draw from. So there's a lot of characters that are already created, there's a lot of stories that have already happened, and you can draw into that when designing the game. I think when working with an individual, such as a celebrity, it's kind of more of a blank canvas that you can start from. So I think you have a lot more opportunity to kind of go and do something different and sort of stray from whatever sort of conventional thoughts you had there. And so I think there's more opportunity there, but then it's also a lot of extra sort of work and effort to kind of create that world for the game. So I'd say it's a pro and a con on both sides, and it just depends on are you taking an existing game and reskinning it, or are you starting from scratch, and what's the right fit for the game that you want to make.
All right. For the benefit of those in the audience that maybe haven't done a licensed IP game before, can one of you speak to what the structure of the deal looks like? Is it a traditional publishing arrangement? Are you required to hit a certain number of KPIs before you're even allowed to announce the partnership? Who wants to enlighten us?
So, as a movie studio, we operate under a traditional license agreement. So what that usually entails is a licensee, that could be a developer or a publisher, will pay a recoupable minimum guarantee, or an MG as we call it, that is earned out against a royalty share on the back end. That structure allows for some flexibility in terms of knowing upfront what you're spending on the license itself, and then to share on the upside in its success. So it's very straightforward, but obviously there's different structures out there. We can do rev share deals or co-investment deals. There's a lot of different models that become open depending on the property.
All right. How do you balance or choose what type of game goes with which type of IP? So you have strategy genre, do you know that maps specifically to Walking Dead? You have a story-driven narrative, do you know that maps specifically to, say, a performer like Garth Brooks? How does that decision get made?
I mean, it's a creative discussion, right? And so everything starts with that one creative idea, and I think that's the important difference to make. It's especially now when you start looking at licensed IPs, and licensed games in general over the years have always suffered from a lack of quality, and gamers now are much more sophisticated. And there's a lot more content to choose from across many different platforms. So in order to compete, in order to actually engage, and not just engage them based on the IP itself, but actually to retain the players, you have to have something that's compelling to interact with. So it has to start with that one creative idea, at least from our perspective. We're open to experimenting and taking a lot of risk. I think that's sort of the biggest challenge that we face, is that we try to really present a lot of creative freedom to the developers themselves. And so it starts with the development studio and then build out from there. If it's a good idea, we'll go for it.
He's making a face.
Yeah, well, I can give you guys an interesting example. We built a game called Battle of the Beards, which is the official game for Duck Dynasty. I don't know how many Duck Dynasty fans we have in the audience. It's a really fun game, and when we were first concepting what we should create for the show, which we built in collaboration with A&E, we originally thought we'd make a duck hunting game and tried to come up with a new twist and how could we make a duck hunting game that won't feel like any other kind of shooting game of that type. But as we dug into what the IP really is and why are there fans of the show, it's because everyone just liked that family, the Robertson family, and they said such funny random things, and a lot of it was about the funny random lines of dialogue that you would find throughout the show. So we created a very different kind of game with a whole lot of little mini games baked into one larger game platform, and incorporated lines of dialogue from all of the different characters into the game. So it was about coming up with a game idea that we thought would do well in the App Store, but also something that would align with the brand and what we thought the fans would want. And all of those things had to converge in order for it to be successful.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the main point, is what the fans will want. And so if you think about how your fans are engaging with your IP, whether it's an individual like Kim Kardashian and what that fantasy is, or whether it's something like Jurassic World, I think you have to actually take that in perspective. It's more about, look, what are the fans engaging with, and have a dialogue with your fan base. If you're not paying attention to your fans, then then you're just taking a guess in the dark.
So I have one for Jameel and Khalfan. How do you go about identifying your audience that you're going to connect with? Mean Girls is 10 years old this year, I believe, and Jurassic Park has a long, long history. So how do you know who your real audience that is going to be playing the game is before you launch?
Well, I think, let's say in the case of Jurassic, you're looking at an audience that, you know, when you first saw the original movie, you had this wonderment and this sense of awe. And so you always felt, wow, if I could be in that world, and or I can make my own Jurassic World or Jurassic Park. And so that's the kind of thought process we had behind it. And the first game, you know, we had several years ago done with Ludia was just called Jurassic Park Builder. It was, you know, examining that idea. And now we've kind of migrated to a new game with Jurassic World where we're incorporating dino battles, because that is, you know, our research is telling actually like a lot of people want to play that and be able to evolve their dinosaurs, create hybrids, and fight them, quite frankly, which is not in part of our movie, but within the movie lore, there is hybridization, right, as you see in the Indominus Rex in the latest movie. That's the kind of stuff we take that from the filmmakers, and then we apply it into the game.
Yeah, I think for us, it's all about knowing your audience. And so for Mean Girls specifically, even though, you know, the movie is around 10 years old, we surveyed our audience. We have this mobile app called Episode. It's kind of like an animated storybook where users can decide, make different choices, and it affects the storyline. And so we know that audience very well. We surveyed them. We brought in people for focus groups, and we've asked them, you know, what do you want to see on the platform? And consistently, there's like a few sort of things that you always see at the top, one of which is Mean Girls. That one's also a personal favorite of mine and a bunch of other people at the company. So I think
raise your hand if you like Mean Girls.
Raise your hand if you've been victimized by Regina George. So it was a favorite of a lot of people at the company, and it was just a really fun thing to work on. But I think for that one, the thing that sort of shocked me was we brought in our audience for that app is sort of teenage girls. And so we brought some in for a focus group, and we were asking them, like, well, you were like 5 when the movie came out. Like, how did you, like, did you see it then? Or like, and they're like, no, we saw it like a month ago, and 2 months ago, and 3 months ago. And so they're just all watching these movies on Netflix, and or they'll have the DVDs. And so we found that movie is still popular with that age group and our demographic, and so it's a really good fit for us.
And by the way, just related to this, you know, there's an IP that I had been working on the digital side. We were thinking about building it out as an online series, and it's a movie that had come out in 2001, and it's called Zoolander. And what was interesting about it was the movie had not been something that people were familiar with anytime recently, but we were looking at YouTube and just watching all the fan fiction that was being created around it. It's the same thing, whether or not you apply it to games or to creating video series. The idea of kind of tracking what the fans are actually interested in engaging in right now is everything. I mean, if we had gone and tried to just replicate what Zoolander was back then, it would have been, I think, a mistake. To kind of tap into what people are looking at as that franchise right now is going to make a huge difference when the movie comes out. And you know, so I think it's right to kind of sample the audience in that way.
So, we talk a lot about key performance indicators in social and mobile, for example, and we talk about retention, we talk about monetization, and you really are constantly looking at the numbers to see whether or not you've done it right. Are those KPIs any different for a licensed IP than they are for a game starting from scratch with no IP?
Well, you certainly get the installs. I mean, if you're doing it right. And the way we look at it is, we'll launch the game when it's ready. You know, I think that, you know, I worked at a game development studio. We just had this conversation for about 10 years before I joined Skybound. So I was on the other side of the fence in a way, and we worked on a ton of licensed games, and we were constantly being forced into schedules that were built around release dates. And that wasn't always the best thing for the game. In fact, 90% of the time it was just the opposite. So the perspective is now, I think, and a lot of people are coming around to this, especially with digital products. The launch dates aren't as important. There are many different touch points throughout the calendar year that you can look to where there's an opportunity to gain awareness around. But it's more important to look at those KPIs as indicators about how is the game, when is it ready. You actually have a lot more visibility into making those decisions and push it back. we'll just wait. We'll just keep pushing it back until we all feel confident, and it's a conversation that we're going to have with our partners as we go. So it's great in that sense.
Yeah, I think I remember Glue moved the dates on the Kim game a number of times, and it was released when we were all ready to see the game go out. And even once it was released, it was able to be, I mean, they were able to iterate with Kim on what the game should become in the next 3 months, the next 6 months, et cetera. And I think that was a huge departure from what we're used to dealing with in film or television, where everything is perfect when it gets out, and it is adhering to a specific release calendar, and there's not a lot of ability to kind of tweak something once it's already in market. Even on the television side, generally when a show premieres, there's 8 to 10 episodes already in the can. So you're screwed if people are not responding to what you put out there in that initial pilot. But in games, you're able to kind of, especially in mobile, develop some of the expansion packs that are just different based on how the fans are engaging with that IP.
Well, yeah, just one other quick point. We're building games in some cases for IPs where we're just retained outright to build a game. It's not even a traditional licensor relationship. They want a game for their IP, and it is just not a goal to make money. They do not care about it. There's no revenue model. There's no advertising. The only purpose of the game is to create engagement, to drive more interest in that IP, and you're completely judging the game on how many people have installed it, how much time are they playing the game, and basically looking at engagement, as opposed to different opportunities where maybe there's revenue sharing components, it's a freemium game, and you're putting so much more emphasis on which levers to tweak over time to try to maximize revenue. But very, very different, from a consumer standpoint, they may not think of it one way or another, but you're developing those games very differently. And it's obviously much more challenging to create a freemium game. Building a game that doesn't require revenue generation is an amazing luxury.
And I think, that's where soft launch is key, right? Because that's where you measure the KPIs. And if they're not to where you want them to be based on your internal targets, you let it continue baking until it is ready. But obviously, in the industry, even from the supercells all the way down, they've killed games in soft launch because, first of all, they have the luxury to do it with a ton of money to burn. But second of all, it just wasn't right. And so they're not going to put out something out there, and we won't put out something out there that will damage the brand and not hit the metrics that we needed to hit.
So say that you are hitting some sort of a stumbling block where the KPIs just aren't there, or the game has been out for a little while, but it's just not really where you want it to be. How do you know when to say when on a licensed IP game? Because obviously there's more stakeholders in the process than a normal game developer saying, look, we're just not able to make back our investment.
Well, I think the way that we look at KPIs for these licensed games is we try to divide up the audience into a few different segments that we wouldn't necessarily do with a non-licensed game. So for us, you have people who really like that genre, that style of game, but don't necessarily care or know what the IP is. Then you have people who really love the IP, but might not necessarily like this style of game, but they downloaded it because their favorite TV show is on it or whatever. And then you have that middle piece where you have fans of the IP who are also fans of that style of game. And if you do it right, then there's going to be a huge overlap there. So what I think you'll see is that for people who like the game but don't care about the IP, you can sort of try to do things to satisfy that audience and just make sure that you have all the classic features for that style of game. If it's a match 3 game or a hidden object game or whatever it is, make sure you have enough in there for that segment. Or if you can focus on the people that really like the IP and maybe add some things to tweak the style of the game to appeal more to that audience. So I think if you don't have that match from the beginning, then there's areas you can work with on either side and decide okay, well, do you want to emphasize the IP more, or do you want to emphasize the game mechanics more, and try and figure out what the balance is for that combination.
So rapid iteration is also something that's really integral to social mobile game development, but now increasingly on console and PC as well. For cases where you need to iterate or make a change, what's the approvals process look like? If, say, you need to tweak the character model of a celebrity who's in your game, or you need to change a key plot point so that it aligns somewhat differently for a gameplay purpose, for example. Game of Thrones comes to mind for that particular use case. How do you handle that?
Well, I think from, let's say, film or TV show, we work very collaboratively with the showrunners or the filmmakers, right? So if there needs to be changes in tweaks in characters or storylines, we will go work with them and the development party to make sure that it still feels on brand while we're making the tweaks, but that it's the best possible avenue to expand the game and actually hit what the audiences are looking for. So it's a highly collaborative process on the creative side all around.
Yeah, I would add to that. I mean, we're trying to actually change the relationship. That's our goal, to change the relationship between a typical licensor and a developer. So we are actually trying to give a lot more range to the developer/publisher, because it's their business that they're going to run. And we try to spend a lot more time in the beginning, where we'll work with them very, very closely. In fact, we'll even bring in a lot of the writers that are at our disposal to sort of help shape the narrative around the game. But when it comes down to it, we want the game to be, it's their interpretation, so it feels authentic to the player and not something that's just a derivative licensed experience of an IP. I think what worked exceptionally well for Telltale is that people came to it because it felt like a brand new IP in an existing universe, but it still maintained that same thematic flavor that the show and the comic both had.
I think for us, we try to sort of anticipate, what are the types of changes that would be required, in the wild after the game is launched, so we can do the rapid iteration. So we might say, when we're going through the approval process, we might say, well, okay, well these things are going to be priced at 50 cents, but it could be 25 cents, it could be $1, make sure they're okay with that range so we can do some testing. Or we might say, the storyline will go this way, but it could also do these other two branches, and we'll see what happens when it comes out. So that way, you can at least get a few things changed, pretty quickly to try different scenarios out while the game is launched, while you're waiting for any additional approvals if you need to make bigger changes.
Let's talk a little bit. I'm trying to figure out how to structure this question, but let's call it a question of timing. So in instances where the celebrity is still alive and doing stuff, or where the show is still on the air and has a season, how does that impact the cadence at which you release new content, the ways in which you interact with your fans?
Well, I can speak to that. When we have a lot of touch points throughout the year. As a television series, it's great. I mean, especially for The Walking Dead, there's 2 seasons. Now we have a 3rd. So it's almost become a year-round experience. So we don't really adhere to specific dates around the show. And because we're on the comic book side and we deal directly with the creator of the comic book, that's much less important for us. But we have live events, and we have a lot of things that we do throughout the year that are engaging our fans where they are. So we actually look towards events sometimes that are built around cons, for example. That's a great opportunity, but even beyond that, we're looking for some touch points throughout the year that we can. It's really about sort of engaging our fans where we know where they are, versus just looking at sort of the media spectacle that might exist around a release date again.
Yeah, on the talent side, I mean, what we did with Kim's game, and one of the things that I'm trying to impress on any of our other clients that are getting into these games as well, is that they've got to start to think about it as a platform. I mean, it's not really just a game for Kim. It's a place where she can literally tie all of her launch messaging to anything that she wants to get into. It could be a licensed consumer products line. It could be her next movie or TV project or live event. Anything she's doing, she can announce that inside of this game and use it as a social media platform. So it becomes an extension of her social profile, just like Instagram and Twitter have been important for her. This is an area where she has a big platform. There's quite a large volume of installs of the game. So when she drops a message inside of the app, it's going to have the same kind of resonance that it would if she was pushing it out on Twitter or Instagram, except in this case, she's now directly monetizing that audience. I think more and more of our clients are actually looking at that ability to use it as a platform, and as a result, if you look at the way that Kim built her schedule around the Kardashian game, we basically ingested her calendar of everything that she was going to go do over the next 12 months, and they started building out game experiences that mirrored that. So if she was in Milan for Fashion Week, guess what? That's going to pop up inside the game, and if you're playing the game, you realize, oh my God, this is happening also in real time, even though it's kind of parallel experiencing it, but it makes it feel incredibly real and very, very much simulating what Kim is actually going through, which is the whole point of that game. So I think to the degree that talent, in my case, can be really engaged and open about how they put their calendar with the developer or publisher that they're partnered with is going to make a massive difference.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that. I think the next iteration of that is streaming. You know, I really look at streaming and what's the explosion that's happening with all these new platforms that are coming out, and what Twitch has been able to accomplish is, in my mind, in my view, as far as like using games as a platform, the best extension to engage your fans, because now we suddenly have a channel to have real-time engagement. And we have a couple games, Super Fight being one of them, down in Comic-Con and Petco, where we actually worked with Twitch directly, and we flew in 8 of their top casters to come join us for basically a video game Olympics. And we put it up on the front page of Twitch, and people who are watching people play Super Fight at home online could actually hashtag in and vote on who had the best argument, and we were basically showing those results in real time and giving away prizes from AMD. So we were actually engaging people in the experience even though they weren't at Comic-Con to watch it live, and we had over 200,000 views, which is more people than actually went to Comic-Con itself.
So that's great because it transitions us into distribution channels. So raise your hand if you've done a mobile game. Console? Okay. Facebook. A couple of Facebook people, okay. Any platform I didn't name that I just am not thinking of? Dishwasher? Microwave? How do you know where to go, where the best possible audience is for your game?
Facebook ads.
Oh, thanks. Wasn't a leading one, I swear.
So we use a variety of mobile ad networks anyway, just to advertise our games. And so when we work with an IP holder, that process is no different. We can now include the IP in the ads. And so for distribution, we employ that as one area. We also have a bunch of other games that are not branded, but that belong to us, and we can use those to cross-promote people. But then I think the other piece is that if you're working, and this goes back to your question of TV show, movie, celebrity. I think if you're working with a celebrity, the advantage you have is that big social media following, is that they can just go blast it out to their Twitter followers, their Instagram followers. And if you're working with a TV show or a movie, there's that opportunity as well. But it really depends on, did they build up that presence, that social media presence, when the movie came out or during the course of the TV show. And then I think there's also potentially can be more restrictions there depending on, was it one studio that made the show and another one that aired it, and then who owns the Facebook page for that one. So it can be more convoluted in that case. But the celebrity, it's very easy. They have a following. They're always trying to figure out what they're doing next, and they're very eager to even just as soon as the announcements come out, they'll go searching for it in the App Store and try and figure out okay, how do I get it?
Right. It is true because it's almost like you think of it less as distribution and more of it as promotion. Right, because in the context of an IP or with a celebrity, the social followings are essential. Or I was even referencing this game that's coming out soon for a new Nickelodeon show. All of the promotion around the show, the presence that they would have at a VidCon with the cast, all of these things tie in the game that we developed, right? So the more exposure that they get and the more they get the cast to be involved on the social platforms, the more they're promoting the game. I mean, really the name of the game, and when you're talking about Hollywood IP or celebrity, is just getting the exposure and maximizing the number of eyeballs that see it. But it is a very different proposition than what you would think of as a distribution model for something that's not associated with an IP, that doesn't have the weight of a studio or a network behind it. It's a different endeavor, different approach.
The type of game itself also sort of dictates what sort of platform you're on. I mean, there's some pitches that I've gotten from clients of ours that it's so clear that it's a console game. It's just not possible to tell that story in that way and engage the game players in that way through a mobile experience. So
don't be too sure. Walking Dead had a change of heart there.
Yeah, but it was so much more story driven that I think it actually felt really apropos the way it was done. I think it would have been a very different game experience if it was put in a different platform. It would have felt a little bit stilted, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, The Walking Dead actually exists on every platform because of the type of game it was. But I mean, it's just distribution. I think the keynote speaker, he basically went through all this, right? And he basically described its content is really what matters. So the distribution and the platforms becomes sort of the delivery system. And we've gone through several iterations with our partners where it started off where they wanted to go mobile, and as we got deeper into development, we've actually gone, you know what, this is PC, guys. We got to go PC first, and we'll think about mobile later. Because that's what type of game, that's what this content, that's the type of player that's consuming on PC will be most attracted to. So let's go there, and that's where you adjust.
So, for different platforms, they have different mechanisms of engagement. Facebook, obviously, you do a lot of sharing. We also see more of that on mobile, and it's now possible on console with PlayStation 4. So how do you really close the feedback loop there between fan and original IP holder? I mean, Kim Kardashian can't respond to everybody on Twitter that's played her game that has an opinion. So what does that really look like when you're trying to get people to share their experiences in this IP that's authentic to the IP? I think Demi Lovato might actually be kind of interesting.
Yeah, well, the game's not out quite yet. But we've thought a lot about that, and I think when it does come out, you'll see there are some interesting sharing experiences that we've been working on that will let you sort of share content from the game. There might be some contests that happen where maybe some of the people get responded to, or some of the suggestions they make on Twitter or Facebook could end up making it into the game. So we've tried to make it so people both want to share their own content from the game with their friends, but then also just share their ideas and their thoughts on the game generally. And we're hoping that the way that we do it, that some of it can end up making it back into the game.
To the point about Kim not being able to respond to every comment, which is true, obviously, there's something to be said, though, about the scarcity of her connectivity to one individual player. That person that gets that direct response from Kim, or that has that kind of exchange in one way or another, that's everything. I mean, that person will talk about it endlessly, right?
To the day they die.
And it's funny because if she had connected that way with everybody that's engaging on the platform, I don't think it would have the same resonance. It would just start to feel like, kind of a generic kind of experience. So there's a game deal that we have not announced this yet at all, but it's going to kind of take a shot at how you engage with larger volumes of people in a way that we haven't really seen done on the mobile side before. And I think it'll be an interesting way to kind of play with that dynamic of how the celebrity can engage with the audience in a way that hopefully gets them much more engaged, gives a lot more people the ability to feel like they've got a real connective response from the talent that's involved in it.
Does anybody remember the era of transmedia games? Sci-Fi Network once announced a game that was supposed to tie directly into a show, where what happened in the game was supposed to be reflected in the show and vice versa. What happened to that?
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so that adventure with Tryon was very, very ambitious, right? So you wanted to do simultaneously a show and a game that actually had intertwining storylines and tie-ins. I think that's very ambitious, but I think in this day and age, it's tougher to engage those two different audiences, because they may have some different identities to them that you might not have foresaw initially going in.
Yeah, I think, from our perspective, because The Walking Dead has sort of become sort of the poster child for a success story around transmedia, but it was never intended to be that way. It grew organically out of one idea at a time, and I think that's a good lesson to learn, because we get approached by a lot of people wanting to do transmedia endeavors with us, and it's always like, look, hold on a second, again, go back to the one idea, and then we'll start there. And we love to build worlds. Comic books are a great platform for that, so we had that advantage where we actually have some properties that are not just a linear 3-act story, but actually have the ability to extend into multiple directions. So that's where it starts. It starts with, what is the idea? What is the world that you're trying to build around? You can build a transmedia property around that, but to your point, to try to do two things like simultaneously with two different companies working towards two different goals and two different audiences is very difficult to do. I do think you can reach that transmedia goal, but you have to sort of be thinking about each specific thing very individually. And then if you have a community, which is the most important aspect of all of this, around that IP, if you can connect that digitally, which you can now, and tether lots of these different experiences to one community, then you actually have the ability to build out a transmedia property in a much different way, kind of similar to what they were trying to do, but it just takes time.
Yeah, I think, just one point to that, because I've always thought it was interesting that, the movie production cycle and the game production cycle are never on the same path. So it's impossible to get, these day and date releases to really work well, where both properties end up looking great. And I think what Dan's saying is exactly right, that if there's people that are really big fans of an IP, it doesn't matter if the game comes out on the same day or not. If the game is great, it could come out a few years later and is actually going to be a really compelling experience that maybe gives lift to other ways to exploit that IP in television or in graphic novels or elsewhere, that eventually, in time, there's a way to actually have a real, true transmedia experience. But I think to try and build it from scratch, I've never really seen that work really well.
Yeah, and I don't know that this would be referred to as transmedia in the way that you're thinking of it, but if you define transmedia as broadly as using multiple screens simultaneously and, sort of cross-medium, we are not seeing that going anywhere. It is just every meeting that we have, other than like, okay, we need you to build a game for this IP in the context of like the conversation we've been having, yes, that's often just living on one screen. But if you look at the game show space, for example, of which we've had a lot of meetings in that world and people trying to create game show extensions that you would have in your hand while you're watching a live show unfold, you could just imagine the possibilities of what you could do by allowing mass numbers of people to interact in a game show. And I mean, people are already doing it with live voting. When you're watching these talent-based reality shows and vote and tell us who you think is the best. That is the beginning of what will probably not go anywhere and is going to continue to evolve. And again, I don't know that that's transmedia, but this simultaneous screen is a trend that's building, if anything.
I'll give it to you. We're nearing the end of our time together. I have two more questions for you, and then we're going to open it up for questions here. One of them is, how do you handle a crisis in the IP? So I mentioned to each of you before this started a story about a Facebook game based on the Starz television network show Spartacus. Unfortunately, the lead character in that show passed away from cancer very suddenly after the first season. They did stick with the game and also with the show for another year, but that was more or less dead in the water, if you'll pardon the pun. So how do you handle like the worst, should the worst come to pass, or even if the show gets canceled unexpectedly mid-season or something?
So we had a similar situation for Fast and Furious, right? So passing of Paul Walker unexpectedly in his tragic accident, we were planning to actually launch this, most recent game, Fast and Furious Legacy, with Kabam, a little bit, before the movie came out, and because the movie, the development was way down the line. And so when that occurred, we halted everything. Obviously, we needed to see where the franchise was going. After that point, when it was decided that we would continue the franchise on the film side, we picked back up on development, and then we figured a way to shift the storyline a little bit with the actual filmmakers and say, all right, this is the direction we're going to take without Paul being, a part of it, but still having that living, breathing heart of our franchise of Fast and Furious. So that's what we did. We shifted it, and then we launched the game with the film on time because we had a little bit more time to actually shift the narrative and everything.
Yeah, we've had a similar situation happen to us a couple times now. One of which we made a game for the movie Night at the Museum 3 with Robin Williams was in the movie. I think for us as a game developer, a lot of what you can do, you really just have to defer to the studio or the IP holder. For better or for worse, they'll come up with what's sort of the overall plan with the IP and what are they going to do with the character and how are they going to handle it. And so I think as a game developer, if that happens to you, you kind of just have to sit tight and wait for further instructions there. And luckily for us, everything has worked out, and I think the same for Fast and the Furious as well. And so I think in those cases, things worked out well. I think for all the times that's happened to us, something has resolved itself and everything worked out.
Yeah, I would just say don't depend too much on the license for the creative. Make your own interpretation. So I mean, that's really what it comes down to. I don't want to really play personally. I don't want to play as the likenesses of other people who are portraying these characters. I want to play sort of the fiction of something, of a new character, a new experience. So I mean, I think if you are allowing that sort of freedom, then it's really up to the developer to have let them bring the ideas of where they want to take it. But if you rely too much on the IP, then that's
a risk.
That's where you're at. So.
All right. Then my final question for you is, how do you get started? For all the studios in here that have never worked with IP before, if they wanted to do an IP game tomorrow, how do they go about getting a foot in the door? Who do they contact? Who do they reach out to? How do they know who owns the rights to something before they even begin negotiating?
Well, they probably don't know specifically. That you can look at IMDb and see who the production company is, and you might be able to find, or you can reach out to some of the agencies out there that know all the talent and right people in the industry. If you do enough research, I think you'll find out who the rights holders are, knock on some doors. You can definitely, give some cold calls to the studios, or obviously, people up here in the panel that know people. I'm sure that, the industry is quite small, so you can reach out and figure it out that way. And then from there, it's just a conversation, right? If you get in the door, you have a conversation, you have a great concept, and you're kind of showing what your development capabilities are, then it's about matchmaking at that point, right? The right IP to the right engine and rollout strategy for live services.
It's the same thing on the talent side. I mean, we're finding a number of both traditional console companies as well as mobile publishers reaching out to us with the kind of a general template of a game that they're trying to put together, and they're looking for celebrities to be attached to them or talent in one way or another. And we're able to kind of talk about who we represent in those different genres and are able to piece it together. So I mean, at WME we represent thousands of people in any genre you can imagine. So it's kind of like a nice one-stop shop to come to an agency like ours and talk about a game and figure out who's right for it.
All right, I'm going to take your mic so we can open it up to Q&A. My MC will have the microphone. If you have a question, just raise your hand. He'll bring it to you.
Yeah, stick them up.
I also want to take a moment and thank Chris Somas. Chris, where are you? Yay. This panel was her idea. She pitched it. She used to work at A&E Networks and did all sorts of licensed stuff. So if you have any questions, you can also ask Chris. And thank you guys for being up here. This was a really informative panel. Really happy to be here.
Right. You there?
Thanks. Yeah, my name is Mikael. I'm from My Games. We do publishing in China. And some of the IPs, Western IPs, are already huge in China. Some are not, but they want to grow. So I want to ask from you whether any of your celebrities or IP owner customers or partners see the game as potential way to actually grow their presence in China instead of just relying on the existing presence in China and build a game on that. So do you see the game as a way to go to China?
Absolutely. China is a huge, huge priority for us as a movie studio in all facets of business, right? From consumer products to digital offerings, etc. Gaming is huge, right? I just came back from China Joy, the huge conference in Shanghai 2 weeks ago, and it is about how do you bring Western IP over to China that really hits that market, right? So the players in China are very specific about their gaming habits and what types of games that they play. So how do you apply that and truly culturalize for that audience, right? It's not just doing a paint over and making it look like it belongs there, but it's at pure gaming mechanics, and it may be a completely different SKU from what we put out in the rest of the world, so you can split the license potentially and say, in China, we're going to do a completely different game with this brand that really feels organic to how players like to play and interact with our characters in our world.
Any other questions? Over there.
Jess Wei from Get It Mobile. I have a question about your marketing effort. I know that a lot of the games has a huge brands. So do you still feel the need to actually do marketing user acquisition? And if so, is your user acquisition strategy more leaning towards traditional brand acquisition, that type of strategy, or more of performance-based?
For us, we're focused almost entirely on performance-based for all of our paid campaigns. I think even if you have a really big brand, people who like that brand aren't necessarily all searching on the App Store for like, oh, is there an app for this brand? Some people are, and so you do get a lot of organic users coming in that way. But what we found is that when you have a big brand, it actually helps the performance marketing a lot, because the click-through rate will be higher because people will see the ad and they're like, oh, I know that movie, I know that show, I know that person. So I think that having an IP will help you with your performance marketing and help increase the click-through and conversion rates there. In addition to that, I think there's also the social media marketing that we'll do, with the celebrity or with the TV show or the movie on their accounts, and that's great, sort of free marketing for the app. But for us, it's mostly performance.
Yeah, I mean, just to sort of add to that, I mean, we're looking at ways to activate our community. Since we don't do the user acquisition, we'll work with our partners and devise plans and have a creative discussion about which is the best form, like what is the best way to approach acquisition. And beyond just some of the traditional methods that are out there today, think creatively about how we're going to run live events, how are we going to activate our community. I think that's the thing when we're thinking about brands in general and people like ourselves. You should be asking those kinds of questions very early about what are the opportunities that you can do to activate the PR, the marketing efforts that we do after the game is launched. So they're almost like two separate conversations. We want to know what the game is, but I would expect to actually have that conversation about, all right, how are we going to work together as partners to really start activating our audience? And how can we work together with some of our existing development partners to maybe do some cross-promotional activities and take advantage of not just the relationship that we might have, but also the relationship that we're having with other developers. And I think that's one of the most powerful ways to sort of market and promote games now, is to look at that network of other existing development partners. And then beyond that, look at content creators. Who are the people who are actually playing the game on YouTube, on Twitch, and really reach out to them directly and figure out ways to give them incentives and really engage them, because they want to be participating in the creative process as much as possible. So you should be really thinking ahead and really planning along, not just thinking about the game, but really putting together a very solid plan about what those marketing and PR efforts are going to be. There's always this, the acquisition aspect, which I think is more of a financial performance base. But I think beyond that, you should be thinking about, okay, what is that community and how are we going to grow that and take advantage of it?
And one final comment on that. We never have a conversation about promoting a game that doesn't involve how do we make sure that this game gets featured in the App Store, because they're so closely related. And again, it's obvious, but like you have to plan that in the right way. And when are you submitting to the editorial team? When do you start looping them in? Because if you get that right feature, you can start that snowball effect. So all these other things that have been talked about carry that much more weight. So that is definitely part of the promotional conversation.
We've definitely got time for one or two more if anyone has one. No?
I have one. What's your favorite IP game that you've played before? Guys, you said there was a quality problem, but there are some classic ones that were good.
Well, I'm just going to take the Walking Dead Telltale game out of the equation. Can I say two? Because
Sure.
there's actually two that I love. I love Chronicles of Riddick back in the day. I really thought that was an amazing sort of very early take on a movie game that did something quite innovative. And I also loved Blade Runner back in the day. So thinking about, and that was very early on. I would love to see another Blade Runner game just like the one that was made back then, but for today's platforms.
I think on the mobile side, besides our own games, I think the animated properties like Simpsons and Family Guy have actually done a great job of bringing forth the humor that comes with those IPs. So I think when you play them, you really feel like you're truly interacting with those characters in that world, and so that's a fun experience.
Funny thing is, as I'm thinking through the catalog of games that I play, and it's ironic because we're talking about IP-based games, most of them are not IP-based games that I'm playing, which is funny. One game that I play all of the games that we make, of course, right, and when we're testing them, but the one that we made that I got the most into, we actually built in collaboration with him, which was a game for the movie Box Trolls, which is a really great game, and I would say that's probably the one that I spent the most time on, advancing through it. But most of the games I'm playing now are not based on Hollywood IP.
Yeah, I think for me, a game that we haven't made, I got really hooked on the Simpsons game, when it first came out, and I played that for months and months and months. And then, for our games, for Night at the Museum 3, I didn't plan this, but the villain, like I'm the villain in the game. Like the art team came over and they're like, hey, can we use this drawing of you to put as a villain? And then I'm like, all right, that sounds great. And then all these people kept messaging me. They're like, hey, I downloaded this game and it's for this movie, but somehow you're in it. It's kind of weird, but it's really cool. So it's kind of fun fighting against myself to go through the game.
So meta.
Yeah. My old school favorite game was Legends of Zelda, which I played probably until my console melted. More recently, I still find Grand Theft Auto to be like the greatest stress relief of all
Interesting.
time.
You went with an actual video game property as an IP.
I know.
I thought you were going to say E.T. from on Atari. Yeah, that's cheating.
Yeah.
I was thinking somebody was going to say the Atari E.T. game that was crazy hard. The Are You Afraid of the Dark game, I think it was like Infocom or somebody on CD-ROM. That was
What about
really
Aladdin?
Aladdin on Sega Genesis, amazing. The Jurassic Park game on Sega Genesis and Super NES, both great. You could play as the raptor. When are you going to release a game where I can play as the raptor?
Possibly.
If there are no more questions, then we will give you back your time. Thank you very much for joining us today, you guys.